For this level, we're going to look at measuring economic growth. Now, previously we said that we measure economic growth as the change in an economy's real GDP per capita. And so what we're going to look at is the real part. How do we calculate real GDP versus nominal GDP? And so to look at real GDP, we're going to have to consider the role of inflation. Real GDP is when you take out inflation from the gross domestic product. So we're going to look at the role of inflation, and then we're going to come back to real GDP per capita and calculate economic growth. So let's look first at the real GDP per capita for Canada. And here on this graph, you can see real GDP per capita from 1981 to 2016. So we can see for the most part, we have seen economic growth. That is, our real GDP per capita has been increasing. So for example, in 2013, it was 48,121. In 2014, it was 48,840. So the real GDP per capita increased. It doesn't always increase though. Look at 2014 to 2015. Their real GDP per capita declined. Well, when we look at our economic growth in Canada, we can look at the relationship of our growth to U.S. growth. Because our economies are so intertwined, because we do so much trade with each other, when the Canadian economy tends to grow, the U.S. economy is also growing. And when the U.S. economy is contracting, the Canadian economy tends to contract as well. So for example, if we look back, let's go back to our previous here. If we look at the 2008-2009 recession, which we see on our graph here, then that dip, that recession, they were experiencing it both in Canada and in the US. Well, let's look at measuring economic growth. Economic growth is real GDP, the change in real GDP per capita. So we take real GDP and we divide by the size of the population. Well, why would we divide by the size of the population? Well, what if our real GDP increased? That is, we made more goods and services, but our population was growing even faster. If our population is growing faster than the amount of goods and services we're producing, then that means there's less per person. So we're not better off. So we divide by the size of the population. The other part we see in this formula, besides the population part, is the real part. And when we talk about real gross domestic product, we are taking out inflation. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out, how do we take out inflation? And why would we do it? Well, the reason that we go from nominal GDP to real GDP, take out inflation, is because if the gross domestic product is the total value of all our final goods and services, this is the total value of everything we make. If the total value of everything we make goes up, but it's simply because everything is more expensive, then that doesn't mean we actually have more goods and services. So we're not really better off. So instead we look at real GDP. We take out the inflation so we can look really at the amount of goods and services that we're producing. So that's the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP is the gross domestic product in current prices, and real GDP takes out inflation by looking at the value of what we make, but setting it all into the prices from a base year. And so this allows us to see the amount we're producing without the impact of a price change. So let's look at how we would do that. So let's look at an example for calculating real GDP and nominal GDP. So let's suppose that we have an economy that only makes two goods, pizzas and calzones. Now in 2007, we made 10 pizzas and we sold them for $10 a piece. In 2007, we also sold calzones. We sold 15 of them at $5 a piece. In 2016, again, we sold pizza and calzones, both at a higher price and in both cases a greater quantity. So let's look at nominal GDP and let's look at real GDP. So nominal GDP looks at the quantity of goods that are sold at current or market prices. So to find nominal GDP in 2007, we're going to use the prices from 2007 and the quantities from 2007. So in 2007, there were 10 pizzas at $10 a piece. There were 15 calzones at $5 a piece. So we do 10 times 10, we get that number, we get 15 times 5, we get that number, and we add the two together. So we do that and we find out that our nominal GDP, the total value of everything that we made and sold, was $175. Now we can find the nominal GDP for 2016. Again, nominal GDP is the current quantity that, and then it's in the same year's prices, or in the market prices. So we take now a quantity of 20 pizzas times 12, and then we have our 30 calzones times $6 a piece. So we take 20 times 12 and find that number, 30 times 6 and find that number, and then we add them together and we get 420. So in 2007, this economy made $175 worth of goods. In 2016, they made $420 worth of goods. The question is the difference between these two numbers, between the nominal GDP, is that because we made more stuff, or is that simply because the price went up? Well, in order to see how much impact a price change has, and how much impact selling more has, we can find real GDP. So real GDP takes out inflation. So to find real GDP for 2016, we need a base year. So we're going to use 2007 as the base year. When you find real GDP, you use the 2016 quantities, but to take out inflation, you use the base year's prices. So we do 20 times 10. That was the price of pizza in 2007. And then we look at calzones. We sold 30 of them in 2016. But to take out inflation, we then use the prices from the base year. So we multiply that times 5. So 20 times 10 and 30 times 5 gives us 350. So our real GDP is 350. So now we can use these three numbers we've calculated to figure out how much of the change from 2007 to 2016 was due to price and how much was due to a change in quantity. So we notice that the nominal GDP in 2016 was 420, and the nominal GDP in 2007 was 175. So we can figure out the difference between those. So 420 minus 175. And 420 minus 175 is 245. Now, how much of this 245 was because of a change in price, and how much of it was a change in quantity? Now, this triangle that you see here is a mathematical symbol called delta, and it just means change. So we use it to signal a change in price and a change in quantity. Well, to figure out how much of the 245 is a change in price and how much is a change in quantity, we need to compare the formulas for our three calculations here. So the 2007 calculation for nominal GDP was the prices of 2007 and the quantities of 2007. The real GDP in 2016 used the quantities of 2016, but the prices of 2007. So if we were to compare these two formulas, the difference between them is the price or the quantity? Well, notice the prices are the same. They're both 2007. So the difference between these two formulas is only quantity, which means if we take 350 minus 175, we can figure out how much of the change in nominal GDP between 2007 and 2016 is because we made more stuff. So 350 minus 175 is 175. Now, if we compare the formula for the 2016 nominal GDP, so let's compare this one here. Now, if we compare that to the real GDP for 2016, the nominal GDP in 2016 uses the prices of 2016 and the quantities of 2016. Real GDP uses the quantities of 2016 and the prices of 2007. So what's the difference between those two formulas? Well, the difference between those two formulas is the price, because they're using the same quantity. So we can find out how much of the difference between the nominal GDP in 2007 versus the nominal GDP in 2016, how much of that difference is due to a price change by comparing the two formulas where the only difference between them is price. So we can take 420 minus 350, and when we do that, we get 70. So if we're comparing the nominal GDP of 2016, which was 420, and the nominal GDP of 2007, which was 175, we see that nominal GDP has increased. It's increased by 245. 70 of that was from a change in price. 175 of that was because we sold more stuff. So if you find the nominal GDP for the 2 years and the real GDP for the newer year, using the previous as a base year, you can then figure out how much change is due to price change and how much is due to a quantity change.